So Gene, maybe mention, your book. Uh, tell us about what inspired you to write it.
That's a very interesting question. The history of my book, Sweet Memories, Family, Friends, Chess, and Sugar, goes back to 1958, where I was living in Havana and my father handed to me his memoirs that he were typewritten, and the title of his book was Walking and Wandering under the sign of the cross in the shadow of the swastika. He had been in concentration camps with Hitler in France and in concentration camps with Franco in Spain for being undocumented. And he has a fascinating story, and to a degree you could say that chess saved his life, because while he was after Dunkirk, where he was a volunteer with the British Army, when he was dismissed and told by the British, like to all the volunteers, please take your civilian clothes and run because we cannot take care of you. My father started to run towards Spain again, and as he wrote in his memoirs, teaching chess and languages was the way that he could survive during that period. So it is quite a history. We published the book of memoirs of my father since 1958. It took me until 2014, after I had already been established, created a family, established myself in business, and one of my sons, in a work of love, decided to help me to translate the book from the Spanish to English, and we published the memoirs of my father. Many years later, by social media, somebody in Spain learned about my long history of chess and decided to give me a series of interviews for the chess column he had in a leading newspaper, in a leading magazine in Spain. And after we had an unbelievable, beautiful interview in Madrid back in 2017, he told me that forget about chess, you should write about your life history with your father and your family. And in any event, he published 5 beautiful articles of my interview with him on chess. And later on, based on that, I continue, and we end up publishing with the great historian of chess in Spain, Javier Cordero, as co-author. We published my biography on chess. Then, a few years, 2 years later, I was starting to translate that book to publish it in English as a chess book, when all of a sudden, an executive of the sugar industry nominated me for Sugar Man of the Year. So all of a sudden, I thought that I became a grandmaster of sugar. And my co-author and some other friends advised me to forget about writing a book of chess and writing a book about my father's history and my family history, as the great writer Nepomuceno had already recommended back in 2017. So we changed the book from being like the Spanish book title was Jugando en el Tablero de la Vida, playing on the board of life, with all my biographical chess story. We adapted that with the help of my co-author to become a family history based on the book of my father plus my own book in chess. And that curious story resulted in the Bridge magazine Bridge Bulletin with 160,000 paid circulation monthly. We'll publish this next month of December, an article that reflects exactly my book. It says a 95-year-old chess master reflects on his 80 years of chess and 70 years of bridge life. And that, my friend, is my story of chess and bridge and
I'm
life.
sure you've also had interactions with plenty of other famous chess players. Can you mention some of them? Like the story about the game against Reshevsky, for instance.
Well, the game against Reshevsky really was not a real game of chess. When he was at an advanced age in the 70s, he was selling life insurance, and one of the members of the Westfield Chess Club was his friend. He introduced me to buy some policies from Reshevsky. So Sammy came to my home. In those days we lived in Old Bridge, New Jersey. And I indicated to him that I would love to play get a quick lesson from him. And he, as a good businessman, wanted to first sell me the policy, which we did. And after that, he was nice enough to give me a nice lesson in a fast game of chess. So it was a pleasant curiosity to meet in somebody, a child prodigy of history. And I had had some histories of child prodigies because I had played against Arturito Pomar in Spain, in Madrid, in 1945, when he was 12 years old.
Can I ask you, how did they get Reshevsky won? Yeah.
Of course, Reshevsky won. Pomar, I was able to make a draw in that game, and many years later, some 30 years later, I play another child prodigy, Joel Benjamin. I will never forget that I made the poor kid cry because he was at the time 11 years old. He thought that he had the game won, but being a good player of endings, I knew that I could escape, and we ended up with a draw, which made him cry.
I'm gonna if I ask him about that the next time I see him, he goes to the tournaments that we have. Do you think he'll remember that one or no?
No, he probably won't, although I reminded it to him one time. Then I play against Joel Benjamin another 2 times. The second time was also a draw, and by then he was already a master as a teenager. And then the third time was in 1991 at the Connecticut tournament, where after beating Robert Byrne and making a draw with Arthur Bisguyer, I play Benjamin, who demolished me. So against Benjamin, I have a score of 1 loss and 2 draws. Against Bisguyer, I play 6 times, and 5 times, and I have the privilege of 4 draws and only losing once. And against Robert Byrne, I had the privilege of only playing once and winning at Connecticut 1991. So I had a few episodes in my life that, being just an amateur, made me a proud amateur.
Gene, one of the things that was fascinating is that you lived through the Spanish Civil War. So can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, my first experience and contact with America was during the Spanish Civil War, because in 1937 the U.S. sent a destroyer to Gijón, Spain, to evacuate all the American and Latin American citizens. Since my mother and my uncles were born in Cuba, we qualify as part of the Latin American, so we left Gijón for France in an American destroyer, and I remember as a 7-year-old kid, almost 8, sleeping on the floor of the destroyer, and a tall white uniformed officer coming to offer us all chocolate bars. And my gosh, after going hungry for months and months, to be offered chocolate bars, that was something I will never forget in my life. That was my first contact with America. Who would have told me then that 60, 80, almost 90 years later, I was going to be living in America happily with 4 children and 7 grandchildren who are my legacy.
You also left Cuba, so maybe you could talk about your experiences for why you left Cuba, and just mentioned. I think I found it very interesting. So,
well, I left Cuba. The first year of Castro in power, he came to power January 1, 1959. I have met Fidel Castro my first day in Havana, Cuba, in November 1947, because my brother and his boss, who was a representative, a government high position, a congressman, took me that first night to a tour of Havana at night, and we end up, after visiting many places, we end up in an open-air cafe, Los Aires Libres de 12:23, to have some refreshments. And all of a sudden, 2 youngsters came into the place. It was a very popular spot. And the congressman waved them in, invited them to our table, and they had a conversation where it was evident that Castro had been the congressman Angel Fernandez Varela, a student at the Jesuit school in Havana. And after they left, I asked the congressman, who are these 2 youngsters? And the first one, I don't remember the name, but the second one was Fidel Castro, and as the congressman told me, he was at the time a university leader. Since I was going to enter that year into Havana University, I had to remember his name. And my gosh, what was not my surprise, when in 1959 I see him entering as the leader of the revolution as the winning leader, it was quite an experience. The first year, 1959, they were very, very effective and very popular because on one hand, the population in general was happy that he had freed the country from a dictatorship of the right, Fulgencio Batista. And they were acting very moderate in a way, but in 1960 they started showing their true colors, and it was exactly July 18th, the anniversary of the Spanish Civil War, where all of a sudden he came to a national address on television, and the substance was that he was dismissing the provost and all the deans of the different faculties of Havana University. That was to me a clear sign that that was going to become a dictatorship, and I had had enough of dictatorships with the ones in Spain, and whether it is the dictatorship of the right or the dictatorship of the left are equal in procedures and in unhealthy atmosphere for my taste. So that day I decided I had to leave Cuba, send my parents back to Madrid, and as soon as they were off from Havana, I tried to leave. It was not easy. I could write a book about it, but for the purposes of this chess conversation, I just can say that I was delighted to be able to come to the US to learn the English and see the American way of life. And I was planning to stay here maybe 1 year, maybe two, on my way back to Spain. But I met a girl from Brooklyn at a Christmas party, and the rest is history.
She's sitting right there.
If you can take a picture of her.
No.
I think she's well worth it, Gene. I mean, I know exactly what, okay. So you met Castro, you're saying you met him before, years before. Did you have an opinion of this person?
The only opinion I had is, at that time, what his teacher from the Jesuit school told me, that he was his brilliant student.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have any other opinion. And when he took power after his revolution of a couple of years, he started doing what it appeared that could be a good job during 1959, in my opinion. But in 1960, he started to show his clear tendency towards dictatorship.
You're worried when you see it here, let's say, where both sides in the United States, if they get too extreme. This is something we were discussing earlier. Tell us about that, like what you're noticing now, like the climate, let's say.
It is very worrisome to see that the dialogue, the civilized dialogue between a two-party system is breaking down. It's very troublesome to see that the Congress becomes a totally ineffective governing function, which leads the way for more and more radical opinions in the population, and it starts to polarize the nation between the left and the right, because as that happens, the center starts to disappear, And if the center disappears, democracy is dead, right?
And lastly, I definitely want to have a game with Gene, just so I could say that my ALEKHINE number is now 2. So here we go. Here we go. Yeah, right. Yeah. It's hard to hold the camera here. I hit the bishop, right? So it's
Yeah.
your turn. Yeah.
I offered you a draw.
All right.